Alright, abusia mami mo bibia kwaba na me mfa mbra mega TV and platform eso. Nyankopon anhyira bibia any de bia mo support am de emaye. Na in fact PBSC in 2008 Brayura President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo na waye candidate edema the ruling party NPP. Na Yura Captain Kyei Smart edin simbia babontin. Ochiremu a Yura Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo anyo no ena oye den ochusu Dr. Muhammadu Bawumia. Na mmom eyo no ankasa ne yonko achimma afes no ena omoye some consultation bi ena omuhu se no Bawumia yo bi a obeboaye after Nana Addo no Bawumia beboaye. Enti this means say enkomodidie bi koso ema omuhu se alan no na ombe mafia ne dada. Na Captain Kyei Smart echiremu a Yura Dr. Muhammadu Bawumia eye Akufo-Addo the running mate because na Kinufurata the data bank here ene eye one of the robust bank in this country no. Na opesen banks no ina eye successful any insurance any chese aban ni mu enema ina no na opese ono o take over into make suggestions edema Akufo-Addo any gabi asare ochire daako one no any make that suggestions edema Akufo-Addo no ena Akufo-Addo so etenase eno ye na adwe se so sa na waka dia mede be ye adwuma eno koyi Muhammadu Bawumia. Enti ene de course aina magana ye economy no apratiti apansem na no eye Kinufurata as we all know se ono ene sika bi otimi ko jibosia otimi ko sign contract bi kura no na even contract ni minister abedi na to honom enya we omo ya alan kwadwikire mantin bi abusia eye nsem papa ensem gu ho na yebeko yekwakuti ochiremu a Captain Kyei Smart chiremu a saade we koso ema meeting bi ekoso wo ahojo runabout baby hotel bi mu. Yes ananka ewose papa hona booking de Japan otimi ko bi nanso omu esno be Canadian Japan omu chiremu a ene de captain kan ba memeka omu chiremu a Captain Kyei Yura Canadian Japan na no etro ono de asem bia no na wa take no personal na waka won sa life no enti omu amana nko bi abusia achimma face ni chase so omu ye omu adwuma nyindemu omu chase se omu rutu evil enyindemu. They have been working since Kufuor pencil Kufuor aban sometimes na shake yenkoyi na ejina achimma face Akufo-Addo die ni mu gabi toaso Furata toaso santibedi toaso ochehene ene omobu keka ho hye chiri. Yes na mempesem ma mekasa yedodo yenko na yenkoti captain na nkasa ensem odi tu edwa na efi honum no obehu se achimma face omoyi ni pa bonefo omodi wu papa including Kinufurata any aye Bawumia na Bawumia so yakoda so timtina se mo biki no very sad. Yankopon shira menua bi ma amadi na revival man the link in our comment section sorry description ko na koye den ko streaming nyum no on all the social media baby streaming nyum na na koye den ko stream bi nti sen na enfamra koba ensem fufuro mi get better so one Yankopon shira.
This on authority. I don't care wherever anybody will invite me, I will come and prove to you. Say Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo the selected Bawumia, it was Kinufurata and Gabi Ocheredako. That time, na Kinufurata, ne bank no pay them. Now listen to this history and story well. So coach na baby aka what can ye? Cause 7:30 pepe maybe. One, Nina Kwaya Kwasi, Baumia was able to help Kenoforiata secure whatever documentation or whatever. Because don't forget that Baumia had an oversight responsibility over the risk and surveillance at Bank of Ghana. Main code details. Because Sikabi Ira wo. See one time be koso wo. And no enye ne be 15th November ho kono. I'll bring you documents and evidence. Mimbie manon kasema minimum da. And I'm in cancer about me Rieska, Mrs. Kayra ho. Sikabet Mayra will fear our bedroom, not that way, Jum. But I know the nonsense I am talking about. It's a do set that not do here or beer. About running mate, no. He was scouting. And then Kenoforiata and Gabi Ochedako said that, oh, we know this gentleman at the Bank of Ghana. That's the son of Alain Baumia, a very prominent NDC person. Nana Chubrik, a branch and whopping Obebow. Yabutre, Nafano. It's a man, son of Baumia, 2008, the Mamika, a medium Ibanu Mansumanu, yet the NDC Casa and Afenyo Markins. Guys, I said no. Come high and Minsamo. Mimi Banu Mansumanu. It's about me, I'm dancing. Anything pine. Anna, NPP penny for what part of that time. When we are meeting, no, Kennedy Japan, one Kobe, Chemier, Summit now, when we are no Kennedy, one Kobe, Summit in one way or Kumase, a Hojo. Hotel now, we are Summit, no, Woofrey, a year, a Hojo runabout. Now, we call Santase runabout. Oko kakra, Obefa on sa right. Ofa right, one crop for Tonkaso. Ukwa abekwa kotu T junction na wa fa right say bi na obefa wo left rather ufi ahojo run about kwa obefa wo left ufa left na akoya be 10 seconds drive obekwa kotu T junction na wa fa wo nsa right obekwa no na sa hotel no so eda wo nsa left wo Kumase ne hotel ni di e ho na MPP mpanifo no eye meeting no time anana do dankwa akufado ye na adwen so obefa ba wo ya and na Canada Japan nya hint. And the very first person about TVs and radio so say on penny my Fabaumia. Because they knew say his father was a traitor. Ne papa yi Kwame Nkrumah mai. Na ne papa so sasu yi UP mai or parliament. Ti no munim no. Sa de na ye de wo mojam. Nti abrante no be yi Ghana ma. I swear. Oda pa mo fama na mo hade. Me se guy no obe betray Ghana. What am I? No family would man na mo hade. Obe betray Ghana cause we mojam. Ide I want mojam. And ko be fa Ghana ni running mate. Chebibiom ko be fa Ghana ni as running mate. This is what happened. And apart uja for the afano. Eti banks na ye gu ni krom hano. I am telling you today about me any gu no. Because that they could do in and say Kenoforiata bowa hein it's about me didn't say good chi. Ba me hein aje Gabi bo hein nanapo sorry ba me didn't say good chi. Why? These are the two people who spearheaded, manipulated, re-engineered, re-facilitated, re-orchestrated to push him to become the running mate of the cousin and uncle. So, who becomes the hatchet man? Baumia cabinet. Abranche bi pese ono ne bank etimi gina brane eti bibia beko cabinet a efa finance ho any banking who be ano umupiamba Baumia na Baumia defending. That is why Baumia single-handedly defended the collapse of 17 innocent banks. They published the report. Unfortunately, on our part, some of us, we took the report and reviewed the report as it was that time that was being prepared. But when I left multimedia, I said, no, let me go deeper into this matter. Something doesn't add up. Because obi tisa kwa banado for ono odi ne sika mba ban besia na ban de tua contract sika nti aban de ne ka na wo ye de na wo de me ka na ukum me ba ugum me bank Parkwesi ndom GN Bank aban kwaje several billions e wo Parkwesi ndom odi tua contract sika said e be yo metumi aye kwan ama aban te den na but when I be a document no kwanyo go back to this. Then I realized that something was actually fishy. Some things were actually not adding up. All because somebody wanted his bank to rule over all the banks. And because Baumia was a corporate, he also succumbed to their understanding and the music they were playing. Fast forward. And odi animu ni egu banks ni na. Me ya adoma Friday patwa ya mon kai me Friday no mo refi. Make sure odi entia na nado apa ministers ni na free na chi.
Maya na manye.
Afena kwaku ehu se padis ni ya akromfo. But I too late. Jubilee House in Tokwan de meka ho asemachina. Adent na Afenyo Markins kisi chief of staff in Saho. On that bus, Afenyo Markins kissed. Kusa. Pese me busa sa nye bia the chief of staff office no ya loko ana. Ya tum. Ana ye ntum. Sir, ya okay, ya tum ana. I am only asking a very harmless, peaceful question. Okay. What is happening between His Excellency the President and the running mates to Baumia? Edu a certain pointer. Akomasa one sha. Napo can never walk to the office of the president. There, minimum. Echna me biye ensembie ni achrew. Na wahunie me bi. And I have said this over and over again, time without number. Sir, mampeni die enyemre. When I said this range on Dramani Mahamad's time, some of my own that time NPP people thought that I was finding a very clandestine way of defending John Dramani Mahama. Afenyo ujafeni aba no so say padis no eprado. For the very first time I want to know life in 2024. Oba festival no buafu wamuna mimi ni makufado because I'm saving a life twice. Me say I no say kind of minimum kura me nchirem. Being who bet me a force me. I'm a match that is why I keep saying I saved his life. Because me nipa no obo me ho bai, obo no ho bai. I mean can't say something sure that say. They no obo me ho bai, obo no ho bai say. Dem fe don to nchen. Afenyo Olman who say Padis no on one abusuafo any ministers of our one Padis ne plano but eno no the discussion for today. It's another today or see nipa bia obe winning election 2024 obe hand over power to him. first Nana Nado or a certain position, he thought that Wawa Bonding, your father and the vice president. Yeah, I've told you, Baumiani Papa was a traitor to Kwame Nkrumah, and Baumia is still a traitor. Your idea be what would you mutai, wouldn't be told to the direct. So Papa ye cromfo, the way ya soft for Papa Bimanam deliver me do yame, Ubaba Cron once well. Baumia Papa na you pimai Kwame Nkrumah time. It is the same Baumia's Papa. I know ye Kwame Nkrumah mind when the UP went ganged up against Kwame Nkrumah. That guy is still a traitor, and he is. And a wafa Ghana ni fa sire ni oni fa edinachi. Ade aye wasase su pass e ni nsen ahye. Na osan ye ohene o. Sabe tuwe pa na me ohene. Mahene ne de yinsen ahye me. When ye anu ye betu afi akonwa so. Hu ye anu ye betu afi akonwa so. De sese o ye na se eba no meba magye atum. Emre bi yo sofo bi wo ba bi. Ne yire oni yatum ne yire yatum. Ana wo akwada broni kokokokokoko. Afa de padis bi de akire. Omo say abaya no den na na bi fi Sierra Leone. Na Sierra Leone fo be kokoko. Minchim me minchim da said the wadrin ye wono fa de sa afena nanado who say padis no edini bone. But your excellency, don't do the reshuffle na person oye no menye. It's too late. Stop it. But you see, some of us will go down in history that we wanted to save you. But some people around you who wanted to steal thought that were the bad nuts. Now, Kroya Yewomi, 2022, Your Excellency, I promised you May, November, I will give you details of whatever is happening around you. If you want to take action, fine. If you don't want to take action, no problem, because how many days are left? You have barely 2 months to go. 7th January, you are not a president. John Dramani Mahama will take over. Take it or leave it. And let me say this. Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo 2022 budget. They established the Development Bank Ghana, DBG. Baby, Amedui Emodu. I have only 15 minutes to end Fabewoso. Pacho Yiwasum Nedimechi. June 2022. Masao Bodadada from October said November we know. And yet I will use documents. And some of the documents, me myself, I am afraid to even project. But I don't know. I can ask my producer to come and airdrop this and put it on the screens. June 2022, this government, as part of their budget statement, promised the people of this country that they would put up, they will establish, they will set up a development bank Ghana. Now, this government secured a $750 million grant. Later we were told it's a loan. Say a casa grant ewa memu mu a eya chede. Say na enya grant no mubwa. Kenoforiata lied to us. That is why the president is angry with him. But let me ask another question. I be Kenoforiata desk can be a sin that ye free or Jubilee House. Hard door. You see, Samemi ye CPP ni. Na me first Samia. Oye APC ni finance minister asem to me emfa ho so oye mba nti etoda party fufroba na emfa no finance minister nyame ne hene $750 million and aban way and set it up Development Bank Ghana. Go and read 2022 budget for 2023. I think it was 2021 for 2022. Aban the taxpayers' money. Another 1 billion Ghana cedis or P and so $750 million and so. And then a bank I in 2022 year June I started boka. And let me say this, Your Excellency, if you want a copy of the internal audit report of the Development Bank Ghana, I got a copy. I can forward that to your office. Ghana for so what kind of report we are home? Corruption, mismanagement, procurement breaches, staff intimidation, conflict of interest, and also say you do baby a buy say onisika enti make we just smart me fama some you. I behave like Kwame Nkrumah because I am. Match now, baby, I'm a sikada. No, I him account to me a bond. I was stand chat. Kona Kobusa. I buy sick or just smart. We seek an mafa because Ghana deka. Maybe the anybody a fancy me a brand here. Me what day? Met me hurry. Nemo me mami Gloria Kufu. Any pennyphobia can one bon kwakura ne mmerewa once one sikampo aban say wafa because Ghana boka na bank aban yatie e boka me share report ni na muwie ye no. I read the report this whole night and I have a witness to tell you. As early as 2:45 a.m., I was awake. One thing I observed from the report, the following are some of the key issues that need attention by the government and donors. Me post it way on my Facebook wall. This is how I summarized the 57-page document.
Anyway, thank you very much for staying tuned. Now, when you say some way, when you say Kyei Mensah bunsu. In fact, members of parliament no omafene papa. Say recently utie Subin Mrashibidwania Ura Boachempi. Ena wutie a year former Obuasi East Mrashibidwania Edward Enin. Ena wutie Asante Achim Mrashibidwania Endi Apia Kubi. Na wutie some MPs binima NPP MPs binima. Uti say Kyei Mensah yomu yi no ambomo edebia meka ni na ye under the doings of the Achim people because Kyei Mensah ofiri honom because MPs binin sorry e kasa omumpe kinufurata Ghana for yi ne sorry e kasa kinufurata aboma nti omunji ni position as a finance minister and infinisem ay kufado no mpeso begie abusia MPC no mo sorry na about 89 MPP MPC no almost sorry koye press conference na and appear could be edi omonim no eho asotwe na modima Kyei Mensah bunso a Kyei Mensah bunso omoji majority edi free ni nsem Modi majority no come Afenyo Markins. Reckless man like Afenyo and I don't know meaning Afenyo Markins onsia de and obi a sebi opehunhuna na asem yitirinti oka onfi. I don't know a lot of nsema ba bonti Afenyo Markins. He doesn't respect laws on fahu because he thought so no na oye mra nti on fahu. I na Afenyo Markins NPP alande in opposition, nearly in opposition, more opposition che. I ne more minority in parliament. Yenkuti sanku modidi no. Uncle Kwesi Pratt Jr. waka how MPs binum a friend or any MPP for binum gurus binum friend or mwankasa eka how they have mixed Kibra Sechi Mesebusu. In fact, Yenkuti is an family.
I did an interview with a retired appeals court judge. And he said, on mic, that he really misses Kyei Mensah. That if Kyei Mensah was still the majority leader, we would not have come to this. And I've heard many others say that they miss Kyei Mensah because he was adept at negotiation and so on. You understand? He did not push for confrontation where confrontation was avoidable and so on. Perhaps we should all agree with this retired judge of the courts of appeal. I don't want to think that all of this maneuvering is about positioning for the 2024 elections. I don't want to. You understand? But now, I'm already beginning to see some signs around the 2024 elections which are extremely worrying. And I hope that this is not one of them. I mean, I was shocked to the marrow when I heard the U.S. Embassy make a statement that those who don't play the game by the rules and so on will be refused visas to the United States of America. What nonsense. The United States of America is not heaven. So if people don't go to the United States of America, so what? The U.S. has no authority to decide the legitimacy of what we do as Ghanaians, how we hold our elections. So the U.S. has no role to play in it. Those decisions must be made by the Ghanaian people. Because we do know that wherever the U.S. has made such interventions, it has only led to chaos. Look at Venezuela. Look at how the people of Venezuela are suffering because of this needless intervention by the United States of America. Sometimes it's not even about elections. It's about political choices which are not necessarily about elections. Look at Cuba. Look at what they've done to Cuba. 2 million people have died in Iraq. We are not expecting the United States of America to decide for us what processes we follow or we do not follow. The U.S. has no business and they should stay out of this. The people of Ghana have the capacity to decide for themselves whether elections have been rigged or not. And when elections are rigged, the people of Ghana who fought and defeated classical colonialism, who have changed governments many times and so on, will do it again. Why? The U.S. believes in democracy. It is the belief of the U.S. in democracy which led it to sponsor the 1966 coup against Kwame Nkrumah. Is that what we are being told? And indeed, all the problems we have today can be traced, or most of the problems can be. The U.S. which was involved in the assassination of Patrice Lumumba because of his political views and so on, it has no role to play in Ghana, no role to play in Africa. They should shut up and leave us alone.
Thank you.
And it is not my intention this morning to repeat all the comments that I've made before. What I'd like to emphasize that it is only in cuckoo's land that the assumption can be made that a Supreme Court decision necessarily stops all disputes. It doesn't. As we speak here, as we sit here, the conflict in Boku is raging. And the conflict in Boku is raging in spite of numerous Supreme Court decisions. So Boku should tell us very clearly that the assumption that the Supreme Court is the final arbiter in legal disputes and so on cannot be understood that once the Supreme Court makes a decision, disputes vanish, conflicts vanish, and so on. It's not true. Boku is the clearest example. Now, the second point that I like to make, and this point has been made by several people, it's not my original thought, is simply that decisions of the Supreme Court have to have a certain level of consistency. Because if they fail to have a certain level of consistency, what it would then mean to ordinary mortals like me and so on, that every judge and any judge can decide anything, and that the law itself has no consistency. In which case, the interpretation of the law will be seen as a biased enterprise. And once you begin to see that the interpretation of the law is a biased enterprise, and is not rooted in principle and so on, we create conditions for general anarchy in our society. Now, why do I say this? I say this because that day when I listened to the Supreme Court judges, those who were empaneled, when I listened to them, one of the reasons they stated was that the Supreme Court has jurisdiction, appellate jurisdiction, in all judicial decisions. And said, I was so shocked. Because the Supreme Court of Ghana has in an earlier case decided that when it comes to election disputes, the Supreme Court does not have appellate jurisdiction. The Supreme Court had told us that if you look at the relevant sections of the Constitution, articles in the Constitution, which deals with, election disputes are to be heard by the High Court. And that the Constitution expressly says that if parties in the dispute are not satisfied, they may appeal to the Court of Appeal. And that because the Supreme Court is not expressly stated in the Constitution, the Supreme Court has no jurisdiction when it comes to election disputes. So at least in one instance, the Supreme Court has told us that its jurisdiction is not over all matters or all decisions that are taken by the judiciary or arms of the judiciary and so on. So how come that the Supreme Court is taking this decision? And the shock of it is that it's a unanimous decision. Okay? The shock of it all is that it's a unanimous decision. So the question that I'm asking is that if the same panel which had heard the previous case had heard this case, what would the verdict have been? And if the verdict would have been different, what is the message we are sending to the Ghanaian people? That the decision of the court depends on who are members of the panel. That's a bit worrisome. Okay? And many people have made this point, including lawyers of repute and so on. They've made this point and they've made it very, very strongly. Now, the other thing that I find extremely strange is the demeanor of some of the judges. And the judges themselves will tell you that demeanor is important. When they are trying cases, one of the things they take into account is the demeanor of witnesses who appear before them, the demeanor of parties to the dispute, and the demeanor of accused persons and so on. Is an important consideration in law. So I'm not making it up. Now, if you look at the demeanor of some of the panel members, it is worrying. And indeed, I read one newspaper which made the point about the anger displayed by the Chief Justice. I'm saying that Chief Justice, Judge of the Supreme Court, a matter of constitutional interpretation has been placed before you. Where does the anger come from? How can you be angry? Indeed, you are not expected to display anger, which is an emotion. You understand? So, that anger itself raises many substantial questions. And it was displayed, in ways which I felt, as a citizen of this country, were unpalatable. You understand? For example, I heard the Chief Justice say, in a demeanor which can only be seen as anger, that how come, where is this country going to, and so on? How come that in the midst of all that is happening, Parliament is not sitting? There was nothing before the court about whether Parliament should sit or not sit. The issue before the court was not about Parliament sitting or not sitting. You understand? And yet, she made this comment in open court. And I think that comment, judicial notice can be taken of that comment. Then there was a point also where she actually went into exchanges about why the Speaker had not filed, or the lawyers of the Speaker had not filed their responses, to the case which had been filed by the plaintiffs. And I'm a layman. I didn't go to law school. I'm sitting at home. And I'm saying that, look, what am I missing? The lawyers of the Speaker had gone to court to ask the Supreme Court to set aside decisions that it had made earlier because the processes were legally invalid. That's the case they took to the Supreme Court. Now that carries an assumption that as far as they were concerned, there was nothing illegal and substantive before the Supreme Court. How can they answer? Master, how can they answer when they think that properly speaking, legally speaking, constitutionally speaking, there was nothing valid before the court? So their case before the court to set aside the decisions of the court is a response. It is only after that has been dealt with that they may or may not file, responses to the original case before the Supreme Court. So I was really surprised. And then instantly, the Chief Justice poses a question to the lead counsel for the Speaker and says, can we go ahead without you? Now, this is the same court which had insisted that anybody whose case is being heard needs to be given a hearing. Being given a hearing was so important for this panel. And yet, at the same time, when it came to the Speaker, they wanted to know whether they could go ahead without the Speaker. In fact, they pressed upon the Speaker's lawyers that they could vacate their rights to make an appearance, to participate in the decision. And I found that exceedingly strange. Now, Senna, I think that there are some principles which ought to be made very, very clear. To all public servants, including those who sit on the bench. Okay. Why do we have a Supreme Court? Why do we have Supreme Court judges? One, we have a Supreme Court and its judges only because all the 32 million people of Ghana cannot sit in judgment in cases. Okay? So our power, our right to judge, to interpret the Constitution and so on, is delegated to some people to act on our behalf. I hope you understand what I'm saying. So anytime the Supreme Court sits and makes a decision, it is making that decision in our name, in the name of the people of Ghana. Anytime the Supreme Court makes a decision, that decision rightly is made in the name of the people of Ghana. Okay? Now, the Supreme Court itself is a creation. Okay. Now, this 1992 Constitution did not fall from heaven like the tablet on which Moses' 10 commandments were found. It was political struggles, political negotiations, and so on, which led to the crafting of the 1992 Constitution. And in the process of fighting for change, fighting for a return to limited democracy, what others will refer to as bourgeois democracy, people died. People lost their lives in that struggle. People suffered imprisonment. Many, many sacrifices were made in order to craft that Constitution. So at every stage, we, including the Supreme Court judges, should be asking ourselves whether or not decisions which are being made today are in tune with all those who sacrifice so much, and so on, their aspirations. Is this what they were expecting? You understand? Is this outcomes for which they laid down their lives? Are these the outcomes for which people suffered so much in order to craft the 1992 Constitution? Now, the Supreme Court has made its decision. Okay. And I think that it is possible for us to look at the practical outcomes. Possible. Practical, possible outcomes. I've seen a letter written by a young man to the Speaker of Parliament, in which this young man is actually warning the Speaker of Parliament that if he doesn't accept the decisions of the Supreme Court, it would amount to a high crime for which he can be impeached, and so on, obviously. Now, I'm sitting at home reading this letter and I'm wondering, indeed, Parliament would make its decision. It is possible for the Speaker to convene Parliament on the 7th of November and announce the decision of the court, and to tell Parliament that this is the decision of the court. What do? Parliament can take a decision on it. Okay. Now, if Parliament doesn't have a quorum, that decision would not be taken. Parliament needs a quorum in order to be able to take that decision. And if Parliament does not have a quorum and can therefore not take that decision, it means that Parliament would not continue to sit. So the Supreme Court decision would actually not be implemented. Not because the Speaker wants it or does not want it, but simply because the House would not have the quorum for making decisions. That's number one. Let us say that the Speaker goes to Parliament and says that I make those orders, I'm withdrawing those orders. That's another possibility. And therefore, the NPP group, not caucus, the NPP group in Parliament, I'll explain that. The NPP group, not caucus, is the majority. If the Speaker were to make that declaration in Parliament, and the NDC side decides to walk out, will Parliament be able to sit? What will be the effect of the decision of the Supreme Court when the NDC group decides to walk out, to protest, and so on? And the NDC group has a right of protest, the right to protest. If they decide to protest in that matter, that decision of the Supreme Court would mean nothing, would have no effect, and so on. Okay. Now let us also assume that the Speaker decides to defer the Supreme Court. How is the Supreme Court going to enforce its decision? Is the Supreme Court going to order the police to arrest the Speaker? Is the Speaker going to be arrested? Is the Speaker going to be imprisoned? And what will be the consequences of that for the work in Parliament and for the practice of this limited so-called bourgeois democracy in our country, if such an order were to issue? And in any case, if such an order were to issue, will the security forces, perhaps the police, effect that order? So what will be the consequences for all of us? Now, let us say that the Supreme Court then decides to charge the Speaker with contempt for not respecting his decisions or for obstructing his work. Now, if you read the Constitution very, very carefully, Parliament itself can also hold all citizens, including panel members of the Supreme Court, in contempt. So what if the Speaker also cites the panel members for contempt? What then happens? I hope we are getting the picture. What then happens? What crisis would we have created? And what are the options for getting out of this crisis? Now, the point ought to be made that Parliament as an institution is a place for debate. It's a place for reaching compromises. It's a place for negotiations and so on. You understand? That is the nature of Parliament. Now, have we come to the point where Parliament as a forum for debate and negotiations no longer exists? Have we come to that point? Have we come to that point where Parliament as a place for negotiations no longer exists? And so on. And if we come to that point, what is the value of this democracy and so on? You know, these are concrete questions which I think that all of us, need to answer. Okay. Now, I've made this point also about minority caucus and majority caucus and so on. And interestingly, the Supreme Court itself made reference to a minority caucus and a majority caucus. And I found it extremely strange. Now, because what happened in Parliament after the 2020 elections is that we had a hung Parliament. A Parliament in which there was no majority and there was no minority. NPP had 137 members of Parliament and NDC had 137 members of Parliament with one independent candidate. So the NPP caucus could not be the majority and the NDC caucus could not be the majority. So some decisions had to be made. Now, strangely, and I say strangely because I disagreed with the Speaker's ruling. Okay. The Speaker came to the conclusion that instead of having caucuses of parties, they should have groups. And the Speaker decided that the independent member of Parliament could join the NPP MPs in order to form the majority group, not caucus. Now, why did the Speaker do that? The Speaker did that because of the very, very provisions of the Constitution that we are talking about, which prevent crossing carpet.
Thank you. Inti we and Sama etimi akugu. Inti wupe Captain Semneti ebetimi aku Onua TV. Yes, Onua TV. Ewo YouTube hanom. Obetimi eti ni nsem ni nyina live. We a live program eno. Itwa bi. Obetimi eti nsem ni nyina. Sansona eye wupe Captain wupe Kwesi practice so de na eye Pan African. Alleged and alleged show no. Yes, also a Pan African memory de bia. I think from a year 8 to 11 or 12. Yes, Sena show no. We promotion a mede momo. Enti ubetimi akọ na so wetimi akọ akotie bi. Enti ade ne de memo bi ma emeka ncho se white. Ebrekun onim se ade ne ye black. Ine se bo me obi o feli. And Bomia Gio mine we secret. Akufadunum, Ekidufratanum, Debinum, Santibidi to a sebuada the password, or Hesse, or Humberton, no was a bidi Ghana buri. These are the people who will be really Ghana. These are the people who will be take over Ghana. And you know, don't waste your time to vote for this kind of rubbish. This kind of useless and wasteful people. Omuni sebi adwum papa bia for mine ho omuni do bia de for mine ho omuni sebi any good plans bia de more mine. We must be very vigilant. Ghana for we must be very vigilant. And this kind of people for mine ho. This kind of people for mine their selfish interest. Any parochial interest. You don't think about the populace, no more think about their family and their selves. The young woman is uncle for crow answer. Ejiji taxa, omako chamo mo girlfriends, omachama sebi, omonamfufo, omunianum, family members. Instead of creating jobs, instead of putting it into the economy, my economy no, it's imaginary nice no. Na omudi kodisa such a nyambrasem. Such a nyambrasem. And a very sad. A very sad. Sometimes what one now been one. No bizarre say, oh, in the MPP when you come up by a crime, dear nombe. And the phrase chess and then bit me near to so. This phrase chess, it is under verge of collapsing. And another year a mokan is a bomi. Sorry, Mahama Amba Ambe revival now. We say bomi to us for phrase chess, a big goosey cra. And it will be like say ube tuyesika pan say what me afford say the another case won't mean tuyesika na go afford different thing either fee paying and whatever. And I don't know say you can be a friends was you see it is very, very disgusting, but you can't conform by a quani and kasa na you see it resides in your own bosom, in your own bosom. I retract it in front of it resides in your own territory. Against MPP and I to my John Mahamami against MPP. I don't care whatever that you vote to, and I say whoever you vote for, then baby I but the issue here is to vote against MPP, period. Subscribe for comment to like you na share na for my na for intimini bi hwe me ma me tie ba for United States New York enti yankopon shira me ma me ena ene nso yes ene US for to maba easy chale in the US bay the rough uncle for being smoothness level in it one me shechiri and as so me no kase so Roman father Roman father now the running mates edema GFP ma me kwadonko in senensi en kabianshim and ma me kwadonko o kanchi nugu ya ene Roman father and a GFP no Ghana Freedom Party no must settle on say ono enebe the presidential candidate. I don't think see balloting be because bill into ye betwaso na ye hu die be. But I think it's a budget for budget approval and budget education be because you know stopping jumadi because of enema went you know the identity say but in way my for we see for now my we see subscribe for latest updates. Bye bye.